What is up, everybody? My name is James McCool. I am the owner of PaydirtDFS.com, and we're going to do another main slate breakdown here for the NFL slate. It's going to be for week 5. We are moving on into October. We are all the way through September. We're feeling good about things. Last week was brutal for me. If you guys follow me on Twitter or sub to the site or part of the Discord or anything, you know that I was very anti-Geno Smith last week, and that didn't work out very well, but I maintained the stand that I took on it, and I had good reasoning for it. If you want to ask me questions about it, I've answered millions of questions after getting dunked on all week, but there were reasons for the fade. So life's hard. It is what it is. If you're not already a subscriber over at PaydirtDFS.com, you should go subscribe. Getting NHL back really soon. Have some really cool range of outcomes models being built up for that, and we also get NBA back soon as well. So tried and true models there as well. $30 a month for every single sport. Without any more pausing, let's go ahead and get started on this. So what we usually do here is we're going to go through a macro breakdown first. We're going to look at the top-down aspects of each game, and then we're going to talk about the player level. We're going to talk about injuries. We're going to talk about players that matter. We're going to talk about players who may or may not be chalk, popular, leverage plays, whatever. So we're going to start with the teams with the lowest over-under first so that I don't glance over them later. And then we're going to move on to the better games towards the end of the video. So let's go ahead and get started. Here you can see that we are looking at the Vegas lines for the games. So looking at the worst game overall, or the lowest over-under, is going to be San Francisco versus Carolina. San Francisco is a 6.5 point favorite here. This game is only a 39 over-under, by far lowest on the slate. San Francisco is a 6.5 point favorite, 50% adjusted pass rate, projected for 2.54 total touchdowns, and oh wow, that didn't work, did it? For 2.54 total touchdowns and just 0.71 passing touchdowns, 1.83 rushing touchdowns. Carolina, on the other hand, 16.25 team total, really low, but a 61% adjusted pass rate, applied for 0.95 passing touchdowns, 0.87 rushing touchdowns. So this game's pretty gross, right? Carolina has looked incredibly bad. I heard on the ETR podcast with Adam Levitan and Evan Silva that Carolina looks like they are on pace to set the record for the least plays run in the entire year. So averaging 53 plays per game or something. It's really bad. It's still Christian McCaffrey's show. He's still getting a lot of touches. He had 18 touches last week and still had a whole lot of receiving yards. He's still going to project exceptionally well, but the rest of the team is just floundering and just look like shit. On the other side, San Francisco, their identity is still exactly the same as they have been. They have always been a run-first team. They prefer to run first. No different here, literally at all. Jeff Olson Jr. is the lead back by far on that team right now, at least until Elijah Mitchell gets back. And then I expect him to take back over and have basically the same role that Jeff Olson Jr. has right now. Jeff Wilson is getting plenty of carries per game. He projects really well here. He should be pretty heavy chalk, I think. Gonna go over and check running back ownership right now. Sort largest. He looks like he should be popular. He's only 5,500. I have him projected really well. I imagine he's projected pretty well across the industry. But he should still be behind guys like Damien Pierce and probably Ramandre Stevenson. We'll see how ownership shakes out a little bit later. But as far as San Francisco wide receivers go, Jimmy Garoppolo is not going to unlock the ceiling a lot of guys. He's a winner. Like, they just win when they use Jimmy Garoppolo. But he's not the person who you really care about having as your fantasy quarterback. So you can have Deebo Samuel if you'd like to use him. Brandon Ayuk, I guess, is an okay flyer. But outside of that, man, you don't really care about that. It's really just the running backs in this game. It's a really low total. If you want to play Jeff Wilson Jr., I have no problem with that. I'll very likely have him. If you want to play Christian McCaffrey, I have no problem with that. He's only 8,500, and that's a pretty good price for somebody who has the ceiling that he has. So it's an okay game. It's not great. It's not the literal fucking worst, but it's pretty bad. So let's go ahead and move on to this next game. We have the Rams versus the Cowboys. This is a 42 over-under. I'm going to zoom back out a little bit just so that I don't have to keep going back and forth like that. It's 42 over-under. The Rams are 5.5-point favorites. They have a 66% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.67 passing touchdowns, 0.99 rushing touchdowns, whereas Dallas, 5.5-point underdog. Team total of 18.25, 55% adjusted pass rate, pretty low. Implied for 1.15 passing touchdowns and 0.89 rushing touchdowns. So my game betting model actually has the Cowboys as very competitive in this game. Cooper Rush has shown to be pretty good. He can run this offense just fine. Same offense they run with Dak. They didn't have to change anything to implement him into this game plan. So Cooper Rush has been pretty good. Michael Gallup came back last week, looked good. They're getting healthier at wide receiver, which is awesome. Their O-line has not been as bad as advertised, even with Tyron Smith out. So I think Dallas is fine. And they match up pretty well against this Rams group that the Rams offense is... I mean, the Rams offense has mostly just been Cooper Kupp in years past anyway, but at least they had Van Jefferson. And, like, when they had OBJ, it spread the field out a lot more, right? Like, this year, they have Cooper Kupp and then the rotting husk of Allen Robinson, who apparently just turned into a fucking pumpkin in the offseason. And then Ben Skwanerick and screens to Tyler Higbee. That's all their offense is. So it starts at the offensive line, which has looked terrible. Matthew Stafford's under pressure constantly, and the Cowboys have a really good pressure rate. So this is a really, really bad spot, I think, for the Rams overall. Obviously, Cooper Kupp is still going to get 12, 13 targets. Tyler Higbee very likely is still going to get 9 to 11 targets, but they can't score. They're just in a really, really bad spot. So really like Cowboys, 1 to cover 5.5, probably to win. They're just a better team right now. The Rams just aren't that great of a team. So you can play Cooper Kupp here in DFS. There's no problem with that. Tyler Higbee will likely be the most popular tight end on the slate, but he is an okay play as well. On the other side, CeeDee Lamb is a pretty good play. You could stack Dallas if you wanted to. You could play Ezekiel Elliott. I don't think that I have Ezekiel Elliott projected especially well. If I go over looking at running back projections right now, let's see. I mean, I have Zeke projected pretty badly, all things considered. I probably am not going to have too much of this game. I think the only place that I would probably go is CeeDee Lamb, and that's just because he's $7K, and that's a relatively affordable price. But I don't have a super lot of interest in this game. I think probably the most interesting piece of this game would just be taking the Cowboys defense against a Rams team that I think is not really in a great place. Moving on to this next game, we have Tennessee versus Washington. So this is a 43 over-under. Tennessee is 1.5-point favorite here, 53% adjusted pass rate, 1.42 implied passing touchdowns, whereas Washington, 1.5-point underdog, 65% adjusted pass rate, 1.56 expected passing touchdowns. So the Washington side is more interesting than the Tennessee side here in terms of stacks, but I have Derrick Henry as just like such a good play in this spot. I don't know if people are paying attention, but that boy learned how to catch the ball. And, he's at a 20% target share last couple weeks, which is crazy. He's getting like 4 to 6 passes per game last couple weeks, which is crazy for his upside. So Derrick Henry I have is just like a really, really vital play on the slate. I think he's one of the most important plays on the slate overall. In terms of ownership, it doesn't look like he is going to be all that highly owned, but I have him as by far the best play on this slate. If you look at the running back projections over on the side in the range of outcomes, I have him with a 41% chance to finish the top running back on the slate overall, which is crazy, considering the slate with Christian McCaffrey, with Austin Eckler, Nick Chubb, and Dalvin Cook, right? So really, really high numbers there for Derrick Henry. He looks really, really strong. And in the past, we would look at Tennessee and say, okay, well, what's their rushing touchdown expectation? And that would be how you would judge Derrick Henry. But now we can look at the passing touchdown expectation and still expect him to get a little bit of a piece of that pie. So he's a really, really strong play. Tennessee's wide receiver corps, they just lost Treylon Burks. He's going to be, I think he's on IR. He's out for 4 weeks. So they're down to Robert Woods, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, and Kyle Phillips. Which is not great, especially with Ryan Tannehill at QB. He's not somebody who's going to maximize the outcomes for wide receivers either. So of that group, the best is probably Robert Woods. Kyle Phillips can get some targets too. I think that Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, if he could do well for my best ball squads, that'd be awesome. But we'll see how it goes. On the other side of this game for Washington, I mean, Carson Wentz has one of the widest range of outcomes for any quarterback. He can be a hero. Like, the dude can put up 30 fantasy points for sure. But then there are games where he is literally just like dog shit and can't throw the ball, can't get away from pressure, just throws interceptions, just looks so bad. You never know what you're going to get. You're going to get him at no ownership every single week moving forward. Like, people will not play him. I promise. And I have him projected, pretty badly, all things considered. But I have him projected a little bit better than Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence can be more popular. I have him projected only a little bit worse than Tom Brady. Tom Brady's going to be really popular. So at 5,700, it's like he's in this range with him and Ryan Tannehill, Jared Goff, and Trevor Lawrence and Cooper Rush. Like, I think he could do worse. So, like, people aren't going to play him over Geno Smith without a doubt, right? And his pass catcher corps is more condensed now. There's no Jahan Dotson. He's going to be out this week with a hamstring injury. Logan Thomas, I think, is questionable. So it might just be Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel. So it's going to be a really skinny target tree. You can do a very easy bring back as well with Derrick Henry, right? So you could do something like Carson Wentz, Derrick Henry, Terry McLaurin, and Curtis Samuel. And that's a cheap stack to go with a very expensive running back bring back that I think works out really, really well. So I think there are worse ideas to do. For sure, though, I like Terry McLaurin with no Jahan Dotson. So a secondary correlation that I have a lot of interest in is going to be Derrick Henry and Terry McLaurin, or Derrick Henry and Curtis Samuel. I think either way is fine. I expect Tennessee to kind of just stomp this game against Washington. So Washington should be in throw mode in the second half. I really like wide receivers for Washington. Moving along, next game that we have is going to be Jacksonville versus Houston. Jacksonville is a 7-point favorite here. The over-under is 43. They have a 58% adjusted pass rate, 1.48 expected passing touchdowns, 1.32 expected rushing touchdowns. Houston, as a 7-point underdog, has a 18 implied team total, 64% pass rate, implied for 0.87 passing touchdowns, 1.14 rushing touchdowns. So Damien Pierce has looked incredible for the most part in terms of his workload the last couple of weeks. Even as a 7-point underdog, I still have him projected for almost 15 fantasy points. He does look really popular, though. He should project as one of the top 5 highest owned running backs on the slate, and he might even get higher than that. 6,200, there's really not a lot of value on this slate to sink your teeth into. It's pretty much just him, Jeff Wilson Jr., and then at tight end, Higbee. And then as we're looking at ownerships for wide receivers, we have Chris Godwin, we have Chris Olave, 5,700. So there's really not that much like good, cheap value. So I think people are going to be looking for these kind of like mid-range $5,500 to $6,500 running backs. And I think Devin Singletary might end up getting steamed up to like, 25, 30% owned on the slate, which is really interesting. He's a pretty bad play at 25% owned, I think. Like, I wouldn't touch him. 7-point underdog against Jacksonville, who has shown that maybe their defense isn't great, but they know how to hold a lead. They have been consistent in that. Their coaching staff has been good about making sure they're not giving away leads. So, interesting spot there where Damien Pierce looks like he's going to be chalk. Nobody's going to touch the Houston passing game, and they probably shouldn't. Davis Mills looks okay. Brandon Cooks is fine. but I don't love it. And then on the other side, Jacksonville, I wrote them up in my stats and stacks article, where I just think that their ceiling is low, and especially in a spot here where they're 7-point favorites, like they would rather kind of just get out to a lead and then run the ball. They have a decent running back crew. James Robinson looks great. Travis Etienne is okay. Not living up to the hype, but okay. So I just don't have a lot of interest in either side of this game, really. Christian Kirk is fine. Zay Jones is probably the play that I would prefer there. And if we're looking at wide receiver projections and wide receiver chalk, like Zay Jones at 4,100, I think is probably a better play than Christian Kirk at 6,600, just in terms of their projections and projected ownership. So, but I'm probably not going to touch any of this game at all. Next game, we have Minnesota and Chicago. Minnesota is a 7.5 favorite here. Over-under is 44. They have a 65% adjusted pass rate, implied for 2.16 passing touchdowns and 0.72 rushing touchdowns, where Chicago, as a 7.5 underdog, implied for 18.25 as a team total, only a 40.64 adjusted pass rate. That is disgusting. Implied for 0.33 passing touchdowns, 1.71 rushing touchdowns. Chicago's hilariously bad. The passing props for Justin Fields are lower than you can even like comprehend. He's got props for like 16 completed passes, and you're like slamming the unders every single week. It's pretty crazy. Big news here is that David Montgomery is going to try to play. I don't know if that news has come out yet this morning that he is in or out, but he did get upgraded to questionable. It was expected that he was going to miss at least 2 weeks with some injuries. Looks like he's trying to come back. Teams always do this. They want to like force their guys back and try to get their main guys back on the field. And like, you just shouldn't do that. Khalil Herbert is more than capable of carrying the load for Chicago while Dave Montgomery heals up, and he should just miss at least 2 weeks. But I digress. Maybe they're going to have him back. Khalil Herbert projects fine in terms of running backs here. Like, I have him projected pretty well at 5,900 if he is the main guy, but I do kind of expect Dave Montgomery to be back. If Dave Montgomery is back, I think we likely see kind of a split between those two guys, and neither one of them ends up being a good play, right? So, but that's the big news here. Outside of that, I do really like Minnesota stack. I wrote them up in the Stats and Stacks article as well, so you should go check that out. But the baseline rates for them don't look especially great. They're not an aggressive team. They're second worst in the league in terms of aggressiveness over expectation, or aggressiveness over average. They just look pretty bad in terms of aggressive index. But their pass rate is really good, and their pass rate in the red zone is really good, which leads to a really good expected touchdown rate for the passing game. 2.16 expected passing touchdowns is the second highest on the slate, only behind Tampa Bay at 2.18. So Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen and Irv Smith Jr. all in play here. A Kirk Cousins stack absolutely in play. I just don't think that people are going to be able to look at a stack like that and really want to play it. I think more people are going to be looking towards the Tampa Bay side. I know that the Jacksonville side is relatively popular. When you look at QB chalk, it's basically like Josh Allen and then Tom Brady at 14%, Trevor Lawrence at 6%, and then Justin Herbert, right? So in terms of stack ownership, like Tampa Bay looks like the hard chalk, followed by Seattle, Miami, Jacksonville. Yeah, people are not going to be touching this Minnesota stack, and it's because it's expensive, right? Like 21.5 for Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, and Adam Thielen. It's pretty expensive, all things considered, but it's less than Buffalo and has a higher passing touchdown expectation. So I really do like Minnesota stack here. I think people are going to be on Dalvin Cook, thinking that they're just going to feed him when they're up, and maybe they do. But I think in order to get up, they have to feed Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen and Irvin Smith before they even get to the Dalvin Cook side of things. So we'll see how that goes, but I do really, really like Minnesota stack here. Almost for sure going to have a stack of them. Moving on to the next game, New England versus Detroit. This is a 45 over-under. New England is a 3-point favorite here, implied for 21 points as a team total. I have a 54% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.29 passing touchdowns, 1.39 rushing touchdowns. Detroit, on the other hand, 3-point underdogs here. Team total 21, 59% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.29 passing touchdowns and 1.06 rushing touchdowns. So New England has actually been very aggressive. If you look at the adjusted or if you look at the aggressiveness index, which is right here over on the site, you can see that New England 5.7% above league average, Detroit 6.23 above league average. So this is a game where you have two teams that are both throwing aggressively, and there could be actually a lot of meat on the bone here. It all kind of depends on how Bailey Zappe is able to lead this offense, right? And he looked okay last week. He didn't look terrible. But when you look at wide receiver projections, when you look at wide receiver chalk, so we're going to have Amon-Ra St. Brown back. His ankle thing, he's past that, apparently. Hopefully he plays. There's no DJ Chark. So people are going to very likely be going back to TJ Hawkinson, I would guess, and he's fine, I guess. Josh Reynolds is in play. There are ways to play Detroit for sure, right? And then on the New England side, the best play is probably Jacoby Myers, but between Jacoby Myers and Devontae Parker, there's probably upside here for this team. I think that you could do worse than going with New England versus Detroit stack. The problem is that I think that the New England side is probably going to get steamed up a little bit, because I haven't ran final ownership projections, but I think that they get steamed up a little bit just because people love stacking against Detroit. And, last week people were just super stoked to stack up a Seattle side that, projected relatively, it was a much more condensed target tree for Seattle, for sure. But I think the New England has that same kind of upside. They don't pass as much, but I do think that one wide receiver for New England ends up getting there, for sure, whether it's Devontae Parker or it is Jacoby Myers. I think that you should have interest in at least one New England wide receiver here, and you can go over and look at the wide receiver stuff here. So if we sort this by just New England and we look at some averages, right? Jacoby Myers overall averaging 6.5 receptions on the year, 102 air yards, 34% in the air yards, 29% in the target share. He's probably the guy that you want to go with, right? And he's only 4,800. So if you need some value, why not go with Jacoby Myers here against a team that people have been attacking because of their quote-unquote really, really bad defense? You can do a secondary of Amon-Ra St. Brown with Jacoby Myers, and it's not even that expensive. Amon-Ra St. Brown at 7,600 is not the most expensive wide receiver on the slate. He's $100 more than A.J. Brown, $100 less than Deebo Samuel. He's less than Stephon Diggs, less than Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, all these guys. So I really do think that Jacoby Myers is in a pretty good spot here. And then the last thing, I should talk about the running backs here. Jamal Williams did not have that good of a rushing workload last week. He split quite a bit. He's still projected for 15. He got there, but he's not near as good of a play as you would think. He only had 50% of the work. On the other side, Ramandre Stevenson and Damien Harris both ended up getting there for the most part. Ramandre Stevenson projects for about 13. Damien Harris... Oh, no, actually, Damien Harris projects a little better at 14.6, whereas Ramandre Stevenson projects for 13.5. So they're both 5,600 and 5,500 respectively. I probably wouldn't play either. I guess I'm okay playing Ramandre Stevenson. But the split workload just is not something that I think that you really need to eat here on this slate. The slate is probably just going to be decided by who has the better running backs, because all the stacks are kind of the same. So I don't know. There's a lot of things to look at in this game. I'll have some more final determinations later on. If you look at the GPP cores on this post on the site, then you'll find some more insight, and I'll talk about it in the Discord as well. But I think that the thing that I'm mostly interested in here is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jacoby Myers. That's probably the thing I'm most interested in here. Moving on to the next game, we have Miami versus the New York Jets. I love this game. Miami is a 3.5-point favorite. Implied score 24.25. They have a 67% adjusted pass rate. Implied for 1.72 passing touchdowns, 0.99 rushing touchdowns. Whereas the Jets are implied for 20.75. They have a 67.5% adjusted pass rate. Implied for 1.7 passing touchdowns and 0.62 rushing touchdowns. So I think that people are going to look at Teddy Bridgewater at QB instead of Tua and think that this offense is hamstrung, but that's not necessarily true. In the sample from last week, Teddy had okay pass per or yards per pass. He had fine air yards. They were still pass heavy. Obviously, they were in a script for it, but I don't think this offense changes much with Teddy Bridgewater under QB. What I think happens is that it's just a little bit less efficient. Like Tua's big strength is his passing accuracy, and Teddy Bridgewater is not as accurate. He's not as efficient. So I think maybe there's a drop in efficiency here, but I don't think that there is really that big of a drop off in terms of the pass rates, in terms of the explosiveness, and in terms of the upside that we have. It's still a super condensed offense. It's still just going to be Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. I don't think that they can change that at all. So the base identity of the team does not get hurt at all with Teddy Bridgewater coming in. I think that it's just an efficiency thing. Maybe they're a worse real life team, but they're still probably the same DFS team. On the other side, with the Jets, they have Zach Wilson back, and Zach Wilson threw the ball 50 times last week, only had a 50% completion percentage, and we should expect that to go up, right? And then the Jets have a pretty condensed passing tree as well. They really just have Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, and Garrett Wilson, with Garrett Wilson and Corey Davis being kind of like the higher upside guys, and Elijah Moore being the better possession guy. So you can really kind of cut this one however you want it. I think that both sides, and I wrote up both sides of Miami and the Jets in the Stats and Stacks article, I think both sides are worth passing. It just kind of depends on how you want the rest of your roster construction to go out. I personally am really, really high on Derrick Henry and really, really high on some of the more expensive wide receivers, right? So I have a lot of interest in the Jets side. It's super cheap. It's only like $15K to stack up the Jets and then bring it back with either Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle's the cheaper one, and then just go with Derrick Henry. And there you go. Like that, I think that's a stack that I have a lot of interest in. On the other side, going with Teddy Bridgewater, Jalen Waddle, and Tyreek Hill and bringing it back with one of Corey Davis, Garrett Wilson, or Elijah Moore is fantastic as well. I think that either side of that is going to be fine. Last note, I don't have Breece Hall in the projections right now. I'm going to add him in. But Breece Hall did end up outworking the other dude, Michael Carter, last week. But I still think it's going to be mostly a split backfield. Like Breece Hall might end up being like a 60-40 winner here, but I don't think that it's going to be anything that is super crazy in terms of one side getting a significantly more work than the other side. So really like the passing game here. I think this is a really good game to attack. Moving on to the next game here. I need to stop saying moving on to the next fucking game. Next game is New Orleans versus Seattle. This is a 45 over-under. New Orleans 4.5 favorite here. Implied score 24.75. They have a 59% adjusted pass rate. Implied for 1.88 passing touchdowns, 0.89 rushing touchdowns. Seattle 4.5 underdogs. Implied score 20.25, 62% adjusted pass rate. Implied score 1.36 passing touchdowns, and 0.91 rushing touchdowns. So yeah, I mean, Geno Smith, whatever, he looks incredible. I still maintain that we needed to lean on our historical priors for last week, but now that we're 4 weeks into the season, I start using current season data pretty heavily for 4 weeks in, moving on to week 5, and continue to weight that through 6 weeks and then do a 6-week rolling sample. So the last 4 weeks has looked pretty good. He projects pretty well, and he's still pretty cheap. So the passing target tree is really, really skinny there. It's basically just DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So Seattle stacks firmly in play, bring it back with Chris Olave firmly in play. I think that that's going to be something that a lot of people do, is go with Geno Smith, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, bring it back with Chris Olave, and just call it good. The New Orleans side, though, does have meat on the bones, right? Like, New Orleans is actually implied for more passing touchdowns here. So the New Orleans side should be the stack that you care more about. The problem is, like, who the fuck do you stack with it, right? If I just isolate New Orleans over here in the projections, Chris Olave is like the very obvious guy that you should be going with. Andy Dalton just kind of tuned in on him last week, and it is going to be Andy Dalton at QB. I forgot to mention that. Jameis Winston's out. Michael Thomas is out. But Chris Olave is just the guy, and then I guess you would go Jarvis Landry or Marquez Callaway. Marquez Callaway did get the targets last week with no Michael Thomas. But, like, who do you stack with this? It's pretty gross. I think that the way that you'd probably do it is go Andy Dalton with Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson, I guess, tight end. Because Juwan Johnson, I think, projects okay for a tight end, but not incredibly, right? He's only 3K, projects for 6.8. It's hard. There's no like super high end tight end on this slate, so I guess you can get away with 3K. There's nothing wrong with totally punting tight end this week, but it's hard. So I guess you would end up going with Andy Dalton, Chris Olave, and Juwan Johnson, and bring it back with one of DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett. Very likely going with DK Metcalf, who probably has more upside, even though Tyler Lockett gets more targets. The other question that people have been asking is about Alvin Kamara. I don't know, man. Going back and looking at running back stuff here. Gonna go to the weekly search, and we're just gonna isolate Mr. Kamara here. And you can find these models over on the site, obviously. Oh, that's the overall. Oh, weekly search. What are we doing here? Looking at Alvin Kamara, so week 3 and week 1, 15 rushing attempts in week 3, 17% target share. Like, I think he's fine. He's okay. It just doesn't seem like I want to really go there on this slate. And I don't think that I have him projected especially well either. I have him projected for 14. He's 6.6, so I guess that's okay. People are just going to be buying into what Alvin Kamara used to be, and he's not that anymore. Like, that's just not what this offense really is anymore. So, for the price, like, I'd rather play Miles Sanders, 6,500, who I project considerably better. I'd rather play Leonard Fournette. I'd rather play, Jamal Williams, 6,500. I'd rather play Damien Pierce for less. I'd much rather go up to Derrick Henry. I'd much rather split it and go Derrick Henry and then somebody a bit cheaper, a Tyler Aguilar or something like that. I don't know. I just don't have a lot of interest in Alvin Kamara. So New Orleans stacks, I think, are firmly in play. Seattle stacks, I think, firmly in play, but I don't have a lot of interest otherwise. Even in Rashad Penny, because I think that Ken Walker is going to continue to see a little bit of work, and I think that even though Rashad Penny is good, like, his workload just is not all that great. On to the next one. We have Buffalo versus Pittsburgh. Buffalo, a 14-point favorite here. Implied score 29.5, 69%. Very nice adjusted pass rate. Implied score 2.01 passing touchdowns and 1.29 rushing touchdowns. Pittsburgh, implied score just 15.5 as a 14-point underdog. 57% adjusted pass rate. Implied to score 0.6 passing touchdowns, 1.13 rushing touchdowns. Take the Steelers to cover, because Buffalo is really, really good, obviously, but Tomlin is what we call an emotional coach, right? And I've been beating this drum for like 5 years or something. When Mike Tomlin is a big underdog, he comes to play. Like, he game plans well. He's like, I'm not going to get embarrassed like that. He's an emotional coach. So he comes to play. He wants to cover. He wants to make sure that his team does not get blown out. He game plans well when they're underdogs. When they're big favorites, he gets lazy. He's like, oh yeah, he underestimates the opponent. He doesn't game plan as well, and then they end up not covering. Mike Tomlin, you can look it up. Terrible double-digit favorite. Really good double-digit dog. So I think you take Pittsburgh to cover here. But, man, I don't know how to judge Kenny Pickett. He looked okay last week. George Pickens got in as, like, his guy, I guess. Deontay Johnson is still really, really good. Like, there's so much talent at the receiving core of this Pittsburgh team. And then I don't know. I don't know what to do with it. So the projections for them obviously are terrible because they're only implied to score 15 real-life points. If you assume that they're going to score more than 15 real-life points and make this game competitive, then I think that you have to like George Pickens. I think you have to like Deontay Johnson, just in terms of their PPR upside. So I'm not stacking the Pittsburgh side, but I do think that both Deontay Johnson and George Pickens are going to be fine plays in DFS. For the Buffalo side, they're just super fucking expensive. Like, you can stack with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, and people aren't going to do it because it is so goddamn expensive. Like, it's like prohibitively expensive. There is obviously a big linchpin here with Isaiah McKenzie. If he's out, then it's pretty much just Khalil Shakur in the slot, and he's going to get so much ownership if Isaiah McKenzie is out. So be on the lookout for that. I'm not sure if he's out already at the time of recording this. I'm recording it in the morning, so I'm not sure how that's going to look. But if he's out, Khalil Shakur opens up a lot for a lot of people, and he's going to end up being like a 20-25% owned value play because there's really just not that much value on the slate. So be on the lookout for him. Outside of that, Devin Singletary is probably the best play in this entire game. He's 6,100. I'm projected for 14.6, and he's looked great overall. He's been getting a lot of the work. It looks like they finally trust him to be like the lead back. It's been his backfield, so I'd be really happy about that. And at 6,100, he's probably one of the best plays on the slate in that price range, right? So it's pretty much him. Damien Pierce at 6,200, who looks like heavy chalk. Leonard Fournette at 6,900, who looks like heavy chalk. Jeff Olson Jr., who looks like heavy chalk at 5,500. Miles Sanders, Devin Singletary, Alvin Kamara, and James Conner and Najee Harris, right? So of all of those guys, the ones that I actually have interest in are going to be Devin Singletary, Jeff Wilson Jr., and probably Ramandre Stevenson, maybe, but probably not, right? So it's probably just going to be Miles Sanders and Devin Singletary that I really like in that range. So I really like Devin Singletary. I think he's the best play in this game. Getting into the better games here. So the next one is Tampa Bay versus Atlanta. Tampa Bay is a 9.5 favorite. The over-under of this game is 46. Their implied score of 27.75. They have a 67% adjusted pass rate. Implied score 2.18 passing touchdowns, the most on the slate. Atlanta 9.5 underdogs. Implied score 18.25. 49% adjusted pass rate with a 0.76 pass touchdown expectation and 1.28 rushing touchdown expectation. So it's kind of a weird game. Tampa Bay is getting healthier. I expect Julio Jones and Russell Gage to be out, though, so that's going to leave Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, along with Scotty Miller, I assume, being the guy that ends up being there as well. I think Rashad Perriman likely misses this game as well. They just kind of seem like they're punting the beginning of the season, and that's about right for a Tom Brady-led team at this point in his career. But Mike Evans, Chris Godwin should end up getting 25% plus of the targets in this game. But I don't think that they're going to need to care all that much. I think they're just going to focus more on the running game. I think it's going to be more Leonard Fournette and a little bit more Rachaad White than we have been seeing. He got a lot of really good work last week. Granted, it was in a passing script, and I guess they were valuing his passing role. But I do think that they end up spelling Fournette a little bit more. Again, punting the beginning of the season. I think they end up giving Rachaad White a little bit more work moving forward, probably like 7 to 9 touches or something like that per game. So he's interesting. I think that Leonard Fournette still is going to be the lead back, but at 6,900, I don't know if he is as valuable as we want him to be in this spot. Atlanta is competent. Like, they have been winning games. They're not the worst team in the league. So I don't think that this is going to be like Tampa Bay just doing whatever they want. I think Atlanta actually has an okay defense. I think they have a competent offense. I think they can move the ball. Mariota has been fine. Terrible for fantasy, but fine. There's no Kyle Pitts here for Atlanta, the other main note. Not that it mattered anyway. If people were still playing him, it's because they're fucking hanging on to their priors. So no Kyle Pitts means that Drake London is like the main guy, and I think he's going to get quite a bit of ownership, but they're still only going to pass the ball like 23 times or something. So how much upside can he really have? If they pass the ball 23 times and he has a 50% target share, that's still only like 12 targets. So that's not that crazy. I think that very likely there are other wide receivers that are cheaper that can probably still match that target total. So we'll see how it goes, but I don't really have a lot of interest in the Atlanta passing game. I do like Tyler Aguilar. He's 4,700. I'm probably pronouncing that fucking wrong. I don't care. But he's only 4,700. I expect him to get the majority of the work here for the Atlanta backfield with Cordero Patterson on IR. It's between him and Caleb Huntley. Caleb Huntley looked fine last week, but I don't think that he is going to continue to be as involved. Teams just kind of lean on backups in in-game injuries. So I do think that it's going to be Tyler Algier being the lead back here. And like I said, I don't think this is going to be a stomp by Tampa Bay. I think Atlanta will be in it. So I do like him at 4,700. On to the next one here. We have the Chargers versus Cleveland. This is a 47 over-under. Chargers are 2.5-point favorites. Implied score 24.75. 64% adjusted pass rate with a 1.87 passing touchdown expectation. Cleveland, 2.5-point underdog here. Implied score 22.25. Only a 49% adjusted pass rate. Implied score 0.94 passing touchdowns with 1.55 rushing touchdowns. I still don't really trust the Cleveland offense to be able to carry as a stack. They don't want to pass. It's mostly just going to be Nick Chubb and Amari Cooper and David Njoku. Those are going to be the only guys that you really care about. I guess you can care about Kareem Hunt if you want to take a flyer, but at 6K, like, just find the money to get up to Nick Chubb at 8K. And Nick Chubb is so good. He's lead back by far, averaging over 100 points per game or 100 rushing yards per game. He's just really, really good this year. So outside of that, just Amari Cooper and David Njoku if you want to stack. From the Chargers side, Austin Eckler finally had some touchdown regression. Looks good, but does not look as good as you would expect. Still projects for only somewhere around 16.5. Because the Chargers just, it's inconsistent on how they use him like that. And he had some touchdown regression, but most of the time he is not going to be in place to be scoring a lot of touchdowns. So doesn't project as well as you would think. Still prefer Jeff Olson Jr., Miles Sanders, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, Nick Chubb, like all those guys over him for the most part. And when you consider price, I'd rather have Jamal Williams, Damian Harris, Devin Singletary rather than him as well. So for the passing game, Keenan Allen is going to be out again. Jalen Guiton is on IR. It's pretty much just Mike Williams and Joshua Palmer at this point. So Joshua Palmer is cheap, and I was looking at his expectations and like his averages over the first couple of weeks of the season, and he's actually looked okay. He's 5,100. He's getting a pretty decent amount of the target share. Mike Williams is still like the guy that you want. He projects really, really well on the slate and projects for basically no ownership. So the way that I would probably attack this, I would prefer to do something like David Njoku and Mike Williams, or Mike Williams and Amari Cooper, or Mike Williams and Nick Chubb. Even if you have the money to do a Mike Williams and Nick Chubb stack, I think that's pretty hot. I don't really want to full stack this game. If I do, I'm going to full stack with Justin Herbert, Mike Williams, Joshua Palmer, and Amari Cooper. And I think that's fine. But then, I mean, what do I even have Amari Cooper projected for? I can't imagine it's all that much. Because the passing rate for Cleveland is just so low that it's hard to project Amari Cooper well. Yeah, I have Amari Cooper projected really low. I'd rather just go with Nick Chubb, I think, because I have Nick Chubb projected really well. So I'd probably just do a Mike Williams and Nick Chubb secondary and just call it good. Last game of the slate, Philadelphia versus Arizona. This is a 49 over-under. Philadelphia is a 5.5-point favorite. Implied to score 27.25. They have a 53% adjusted pass rate, implied for 1.06 passing touchdowns, 1.99 rushing touchdowns, by far the most on slate. Arizona, 5.5-point underdogs, implied to score 21.75, 64% adjusted pass rate, 1.48 adjusted passing touchdowns, 0.95 rushing touchdowns. I don't know how Philadelphia is only a 5.5-point favorite here. Granted, like, their schedule has been relatively easy. I get that. But Arizona looks terrible. Like, really, really bad. I don't think that they get better until DeAndre Hopkins gets back. I don't think that Rondale Moore is the answer for their problems. Their running game is inconsistent. James Conner's not an explosive running back. In order to find success with their running game, they basically have to have a lead. And Cliff Kingsbury cannot get this team to get a lead. Kyler Murray is not, like, teed in. He looks like he doesn't really care all that much. Like, I don't know. Marquis Brown is still going to project pretty well, but he's 7,200. And that's like a pretty hefty investment to put into somebody on a team that I think is not necessarily all that good. Kyler Murray still projects okay, but he's 7,400. Like, why would I play Kyler Murray when I can find the $700 to get up to Jalen Hurts? Why would I play Kyler Murray when I can find the $800 to get up to Josh Allen? Like, that's basically just dropping down from a mid-tier defense to a basement defense, and I don't care about doing that, right? The expectation is basically the same, but I get the upgrade for Hurts and Allen. So I just think that Arizona's bad, and I've stayed on that. I think that they're a dysfunctional team. I think they're a dysfunctional offense. I think there's too many divas. I think there's too many egos, and it's just too volatile. They're basically the Brooklyn Nets of the league right now. And that just doesn't ever play out well. Sure, there's going to be ceiling games, but it's more profitable to bet on it not being a ceiling game. So Philadelphia, I think, is by far the best side. If you are going to focus on this game, and I do think you should focus on this game, it is Miles Sanders, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith that you want to focus on. I don't mind doing a Philadelphia stack. I very likely will try to get up to a Philadelphia stack because they do project well. If I go with Philadelphia stack, it's going to be the same one that I've been doing. Jalen Hurts with A.J. Brown, bring it back with a bring back. It's very easy this week. You just go Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, bring back Marquis Brown, and call it good. If you're not going to stack that, Miles Sanders is the play, right? Because Miles Sanders is relatively cheap. He's been getting a lot of the rushing work. He has really good touchdown equity, especially with Boston Scott ailing. I just think that it's a really good spot for Philadelphia overall. The rushing touchdown expectation is really good, so they're going to get theirs. You can be a little bit different if you want to go Jalen Hurts with Devontae Smith and bring it back to Marquis Brown, but it always just is a comeback with Marquis Brown. You're not going anybody else on that offense. Just because it's just not a good enough offense to soak up to the rest of the team. So overall, I don't love this high total as a stack, but I do think that Philadelphia ends up putting up points, and I just think that they win by 10 or more points. I just don't think that Arizona can cover. So that is the full slate breakdown. I covered every single game from the worst over-under to the best over-under. This is a really interesting slate. There's really not much value. We'll see if there is value that opens up. Like I said, that Khalil Shakur value would end up being something that a lot of people latch onto. He'd probably end up being 20 to 25% owned. There are not a lot of super high-end QBs here, right? I mean, we have Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, but then outside of them, the expectations are not all that high for a lot of quarterbacks. So we have a lot of mid-tier stacks available. We have a lot of mid-tier running backs available. We have a lot of mid-tier wide receivers available. But the stacks themselves are not all that super high upside. So I think that you can pretty much play whatever it is that you want. The expectations for a lot of these teams, even on some of the lower totals, like you can play a Jacksonville stack if you want. I don't think that you should, but their over-under is only 43. You can play Minnesota. You can play New England, Detroit, Miami, the Jets, Saints, Seattle, Buffalo, Tampa Bay, Atlanta. No, not Atlanta. Chargers, Philadelphia, Rams, Dallas. Like that, there are a lot of stacks that you can play this week, and their passing touchdown expectations are generally in that 1.5 to 1.75 passing touchdown expectation range. So if you like stack, I think you just play it. This slate is going to be more decided, I think, on how running backs shake out than anything. It wouldn't surprise me if it was a pretty low-scoring slate with most of the teams here putting up somewhere between 20 to 26 real-life points, and nobody absolutely just breaking the slate. So we'll see how it goes. Like I said, in terms of stacks, I really, really like Minnesota stack. I really, really like Jet stack, and I really like a Miami stack. I wrote those 3 stacks up. Outside of that, going with a Seattle stack is fine. And then maybe my favorite expensive stack is just going to be that Philadelphia Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Marquis Brown stack. It's one of those later stacks. You're probably going to have to go with some cheaper running backs to make it work. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get Derrick Henry in there. If I can, I'll be over the moon. But I might have to go double tight end in order to do it, and I don't love doing that. So we'll see how optimizations kick out. But if you enjoy this breakdown, and if you enjoy me, then you should subscribe here and like the video. And you should also go subscribe over at paydirtdfs.com. Have every single sport except for NASCAR and soccer for $30 a month. So dedicated models, range of outcomes models, some of the more powerful stuff that you're not going to get at other subscription sites. So if you like that kind of stuff, definitely go check out the site. And then, yeah, let's just go ahead and win all the money on this slate and move on to the showdown slates tonight. So thank you guys for tuning in. Again, my name is James McCool. Go check out paydirtdfs.com, and I will talk to you later.